Hello again there, YouTube fans. This is the Real Creepy Dollman here. I'm back. But this is not a new episode. This is sort of a dedication episode dedicated to the late Jerry Lotz. It is July the 15th of 2021. Now, the Real Creepy Dollman says this. Does the Real Creepy Dollman actually remember Jerry Lotz? Yes, I do. Well, let's go back what Jerry Lotz told me before he passed. Now, if you don't know who Jerry Lotz is, let me refresh your memory. He gave me little bits and pieces of his memory before he passed on, and I wanted to share it all with the people here on YouTube. Now, I'm sorry about my teeth, a little stain. It's probably my toothbrush. I had changed it. It seems it's not cutting well. Until I, change the ordeal on my toothpaste. I may have to use a whitener to whiten it up better. But I'll still use my type that has the cleaning ordeal that'll take the stains off and the tartar too. Let's go back. Does the Real Creepy Dollman know Jerry Lotz? Yes, I do. Okay, I met him back when I was just myself before I became the Real Creepy Dollman. Now, he told me interesting stories. Now, he was born July the 7th of 1939 to Jake and Natalie Lotz. They have not one sibling, but they had 5 children. 3 boys and 2 girls. Now the 3 boys, the oldest was Jerry Lotz, brother Johnny, Abba, and then you had Patsy and his sister Becky. He had 2 siblings of his sisters. And they were blessed. The Lotz family were blessed with 3 children, but 5. In return, that Jerry Lotz was going to be special one day, and didn't know it himself. And then he told me interesting stories. Before he bought the place in 1978 or 1979, on the corner of 1738 Frankfort Avenue. That place was actually a grocery chain back in the day where his father worked. Jake Lotz was actually the butcher there. And in return that he was providing for his family and keeping up with the family, Jerry Lotz told me some interesting stories that he loved his father and before his passing and all that. I think he dedicated the ordeal to him by putting a plaque down with his name and logo on the ground that he showed me. He had a special plaque made and had it in cement with his name, and also had a meat cleaver under that name. So that I asked him what the meat cleaver stand for, and he told me he was the butcher at that little grocery chain back in the day. Now, I guess that big business came in town, and there was a bigger grocery chain back in the day. I guess this was Kroger, came around about back in the early days in 1940s or 1950s. I guess that's why the shop closed. But then again, there was other chains out there, grocery chains, that might have shut it down over the years. So I don't know who owned the store. Was it his father? Or was it a different person that owned the grocery chain? But his father was the butcher for so many years. And then Jerry Lotz told me a little bit about his past. He told me he used to look up at the sky for several hours, watching the clouds go past, imagine different images in the clouds. He told me about his famous little billy goat he called Billy. He took the billy goat around to make some money. And by doing so, people had to need their grass cut. He told me he would take the goat around to have the grass mowed. They couldn't get it mowed. So he brought his goat around to chew the grass and eat all the grass that he won. And then he told me another interesting story. He found the goat on top of the church one day. They had to get the goat down. And so that raised a controversy probably by the church. Later down the road, the real creepy Dollman didn't know Mr. Lotz right away until after a certain time he dated my aunt. But before I met him, I found out he worked for this company. It's called NAPA or NAPA For 25 years, he worked there as an employee. He worked in the factory making the Ziploc bags, he told me. And it's very interesting that it was a hot environment like how I worked. I worked in the factory myself to know what it feels like. But the problem is, later down the road, our paths didn't cross again. And we didn't cross the first time until 1978 or 1979, after he purchased the place next door. And he bought the actual grocery chain and converted it to his home. And before he collected all these antiques, he also went into real estate. This man was actually very smart. He owned probably about 4 or 5 places of houses in this area. He owned real estate for a while. And he invested his money wisely from his retirement. And before he got into antiques, he was dating my Aunt Mary. I remember the time I saw him. I say, "Who was that old fart with my Aunt Mary?" And I didn't know the man at the time. And they told me his name is Jerry Lotz. And I didn't know until our paths crossed again later down the road, before I lost my job and before I was laid off. Meaning before they cut my hours back and before I lost my job being laid off, I got to meet the man after all these years. And, he told me interesting stories about his lifestyle. He also, I think he regretted after his father passed away, he took it hard because his father was his whole life as well as his mother. And he dedicated that place in the memory of Jake Lotz on the corner where he lives. Now, the problem down the road, he didn't get famous right away. But I guess I wonder if a psychic ever visit Mr. Lotz before his passing. Could they have told him his future? Well, a lot of people don't see their future unless, somebody intervenes into that ordeal. But later down the road, Mr. Lotz told me interesting fact. He used to know a lot of people. And he told me about Paula Deen and several other stories. Now, before he got into antiques, his wife, before she divorced him, I don't know what her name is, the late Mrs. Lott's name is, but she decided to divorce him over what he loved the most. He loved collecting antiques and old style stuff that he had from the old days, whether it be antique cars, little antiques, or even big antiques. He collected them all. His main prized possession I saw in the back of his, place or deal behind the house was a really big, rare caboose. One of the old railroad cabooses you see that they use for the back end of the train. And I was interested to see one out there. He told me how much he had to pay to have it airlifted. The man paid over $1,700 an hour to keep renovate airlift to lift it over. And he had to lift it over top of the trees as well as the lines so it wouldn't knock him down. And he had to pay the company $17 an hour to airlift that sucker over and put it completely into his house. Sort of, it was like his ordeal that, how Elvis has his Graceland and Conway Twitty has his mansion. And this was sort of like his little palace in a way. But later down the road, Jerry Lotz didn't get famous right away. Over the years, collecting antiques, later down the road, he called his antiques Jerry's junk. And now, eventually people got involved with this. Courier Journal and the news and probably other media got involved back in the day before media was invented. The news, Courier Journal came out, wrote an article on them. And a lot of people don't know that to this day. Until one day only, that changed his life. American Pickers came around. Now, American Pickers are owned by Bob Barker. And if you don't know who Bob Barker was, he was the guy that was on Price is Right. He was the game show host for Price is Right. Down the road, Bob Barker bought this and made this company called American Pickers, where they go around, turn around different countries and buying antiques. So they made a stop here in Louisville, Kentucky one day, and they bought one item off him that made him very famous to this day. He sold a Donald Duck bike to them at a low price. He really wanted $2,000, Mr. Lotz told me, before, all this crazy stuff began, because he told me stories about it. And they turned him down the $2,000 and only wanted to give him $1,000. So he had no choice but to sell it at $1,000. So when he went back, he sold the Donald Duck bike for $1,000 and agreed to it. After that, his future changed. That he got world famous really quickly around the world. And little do you know, he is famous to this day, unlike Muhammad Ali is. For the West End owns Muhammad Ali. But in this side, our turf, on the East End side, the real Creepy Doll Man, it wasn't born yet. But Jerry Lotz was the East End side of town. And he was part of Louisville. And this was the main area he was famous from. So what happened after that, you'll have to check for part 2 for the final finale of the real Creepy Doll Man telling this ordeal. Watch for part 2 coming up next. The final finale.